and also when you think about the way he presents himself as this really plummy, semi-aristocrat, uh, uh, muddle-headed, bumbling through everything, but he does seem to be the sort of, and this is what I think people over here might have a hard time understanding. He seems to be a representative of the old elites, the people you might most think people were sick to death of, and yet they've accepted him more than they would other meritocrats, other people who come from poorer backgrounds, even though I know he exaggerates his aristocratic background a lot. But nonetheless, he's putting on an act of being a super posh Tory, and that seems to have won over the north of England. Can you explain how this parody of a Tory politician has somehow won over the British working classes?
Because I think there's two things. Firstly, he's not embarrassed about the fact that he went to Eton, Britain's most exclusive school, which has produced many a prime minister. David Cameron, who also went there, used to squirm over the thing. He was deeply embarrassed about it. He didn't like being seen as this sort of elitist. Boris Johnson's totally unabashed. But the thing that you need to understand, in terms of the sort of the thinking public that understands some of these nuances also understands that Boris Johnson sees himself as an outsider. He would tell you, I was a scholarship kid at Eton, and that David Cameron paid to go, which makes him, he behaves, he thinks of himself as an outsider, and to a degree the public sort of sense that, even though he's this had this gilded existence to a large degree. He comes from Turkish immigrant stock. He was born in America. He is kind of a melting pot sort of person, and he can, because he's not embarrassed about who he is, there's a sort of authenticity about him that people from very, very different backgrounds kind of like. And because he's got this reputation of being sort of a bit of a Jack the Lad, he's had a few affairs, he's got a love child, a lot of other people sort of look at him and think, good on you, Boris. People will shout to him in the street. They'll literally yell that at him when you're walking along with him. He goes.
Yeah, go on.
You go to a factory. You go to a factory with him, and the guys on the shop floor. I once went on a visit with him and David Cameron. And David Cameron, a few people politely shook David Cameron's hand. Some people wanted selfies because he was the prime minister at the time. But Boris Johnson was literally mobbed. They followed him round. Going, all right, Boris. How you doing, Boris, and all this kind of thing. And he kind of has that cut through with blue collar Britain.
He does.
Donald Trump obviously has at your end.
I remember at Oxford, where we were contemporaries. We overlapped, not entirely contemporaries, and he was coming up in the Oxford Union when I was the president of it, and I had a bit of a chip on my shoulder about all these Etonians, all these upper class twits, as I sort of thought, but not Boris. And the reason was, he wasn't, you're right, he didn't pretend to be anything other than that. And he made it a kind of almost play, an almost game of being this crazy toff, in which he got the joke too. And so you're always in on the joke with him. Whereas so many of the other Etonians that I knew and didn't really like that much were constantly downplaying this. They wanted to appear to be like working class. They called themselves Dave rather than David. And there was something so fake about that you kind of warmed to Boris after a while. And I could never. And the other thing that happens is that a certain kind of intelligent liberal lefty hates him so much that they can't really articulate why they hate him. And their hatred seems befuddling to a lot of regular people who just see him as a nice character. They certainly don't think him as someone they should really despise. And yet he really is kind of despised in the Guardian reading, BBC running classes, right? Or am I wrong about that?
No, I think that's right. And actually, that was something he found quite difficult to come to terms with, because he only won election as London mayor, which is broadly, a Labour, it's a left of centre city. It's full of young people and full of public service workers, full of university-educated people who look down their nose at some of his politics. But he managed to win partly by going out into the suburbs and winning over those blue-collar workers in the sort of outer donut of London, the outer burbs. But he also, he got quite a lot of Liberal people voting for him too, on the basis that, Boris Johnson is essentially a pretty liberal kind of guy. And this is one of the things where he's very different from Donald Trump. Both of them have used immigration as an electoral tool at various moments. But Boris Johnson is basically a pretty much open borders, pro-immigration kind of guy. And essentially, he can get away with talking to two audiences quite a lot of the time.